We are live.
Hey there, thank you all for joining us. I will give a couple minutes for folks to get settled in, and then we'll get rolling. All right, so we are so happy to be here for the 10th annual Philly Tech Week presented by Comcast. Thank you all for joining this conversation around how to create a startup within your organization. We are super excited to dive in together. Over the next hour, we'll share a number of wins, pitfalls, and actionable takeaways in two parts. So part one will be really focused on how to drive change and bring innovation to life at your current company. And part two, maybe your organization isn't quite there yet and you need to look elsewhere. And for this section, we'll really focus on what to look for in your next gig. So before we dive in, Q&A will be open throughout the entire panel. If you look down at your Zoom ribbon, you will see a little Q&A button. Press it, drop in your questions throughout the panel. As they arrive during the discussion, we'll be sure to save time at the end to get them answered. And of course, introductions. I am Emily Meekins. I am the People Ops Lead at Seer Interactive, and I will be facilitating this conversation. But more importantly, I have four stellar panelists who I'm so excited to have with us today. Each person brings their own experience being inside of an organization and kind of starting something new within it. So intros will be quick. They will go like this: your name, title, and company. And in 1 minute or less, I mean it, how does this topic map to your work? So Jordan, I will have you kick us off, followed by Lisa, Ethan, and Alicia, and then we'll roll right into things. So Jordan, name, title, company, 1 minute or less. How does this topic map to your work?
Cool, thank you, Emily. Super excited to be here. Thanks for having me. So my name is Jordan DiPietro. I am the Chief Growth Officer and Managing Director at The Motley Fool. And specifically, this topic is really relevant to me. I mean, I've launched a lot of different products and started a lot of different teams at The Motley Fool, but probably the most relevant thing is starting a new venture called The Blueprint at The Motley Fool. It's a tech and SMB focused media brand. It is pretty autonomous and outside of the core business of The Motley Fool, and we just launched about a year ago. So that's probably the single thing that is most relevant to today's topic, and that's me.
Hey everybody, thanks for having me as well. My name is Lucia Davis. I'm the Associate Director of Data Strategy at Seer Interactive. And in terms of how I sort of fit in here, so over the past couple of years, been working to build the data strategy division here at Seer from a little group of volunteers into a team of about 11, 12 people strong. In past roles, also launched new products, other divisions, new programs with outside vendors, things like that. So done a lot of new development in terms of all of that inside larger organizations. So never in a startup atmosphere, but always within sort of a larger org. So excited to talk about all of that today.
Hi there, everyone. My name is Ethan Lyon. Thank you for having me today. So I'm the data engineering lead over at Seer Interactive. I'm formerly the innovation lead, and I switched roles a little while ago because there's such a thirst for data at Seer, but there was no great way of accessing it. And so over the past couple of years, with the help of a lot of people from leadership to account managers, we have started building out a data team along with Lisa and providing those insights to people that normally wouldn't have them due to time and skill constraints. So we have a mini data startup internally where we're building products continuously through an innovation pipeline. So very excited to chat about that today.
Great. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you, be with you today. My name is Lucia Davis, and I am the founder of Arable Ventures, which is a boutique innovation consulting and advisory practice that focuses specifically on helping large corporates stand up their innovation capability for the first time or turbocharge what they already have. Some of you may know me from my most recent role as the founder and head of Vanguard's Innovation and Venture Studio. So this topic is super relevant, as I would say for the last 5 years, I've lived firsthand what it's like to stand up an innovation unit within a large corporate and try to behave more like a startup. So really excited to be here and have dialogue.
Awesome. So before we dive into the discussion, I'd love to ground us all in a bit of myth busting. I have 4 statements about innovation and startup culture that I'd love to debunk. Panelists, I will bounce each of you one statement. You will say myth or fact, and then give us a lowdown. So the first statement I have here, I'm sending your way, Lisa, and it is only creative geniuses can innovate.
Clearly myth. If that was true, I definitely wouldn't be here. I don't think that you need to be a creative genius to innovate. I was excited to get this question because I think in my past experience, I haven't always been in even a formal innovation position, but that I think doesn't necessarily matter. So you have the ability, anyone who sees an opportunity, an inefficiency to deliver something better or faster, more efficient, has the opportunity to innovate at their own organization.
Awesome. Lucia, next one is coming your way. Startup potential is hampered when you work in a corporate setting. Myth or fact?
Oh, I get the interesting one. Myth. However, caveat that it is a little bit challenging to do. So I think corporates are not going to behave exactly like startups, right? Because they're different in organizational structure, they have assets, they have brand, they have reputation, there's a run state business to operate. And so the considerations is very different than a startup that's starting from zero. But absolutely those types of behaviors of being user-focused, learning-oriented, agile, and speedy, and testing and learning can absolutely be nurtured and established in a large co as well. And in fact, I actually believe the greatest potential happens at the intersection of both corporate and startups, where they can learn and leverage each other's strengths and competencies. So myth, but enter with caution.
Awesome. I love that. All right, Ethan, innovation is all about the idea, especially a shiny new one.
So clearly a myth. I wish that was the case that, when you had an idea, it just materialized. But unfortunately there is, and I've had to learn this over time, it requires the entire team, the entire buy-in from leadership to pretty much everyone in the organization that we all need to change and move forward if we're going to survive. And so, having been on the tech side for so long in developing a lot of these applications, that I've always found to be the easiest part. It's always convincing everyone else and getting feedback and making them a part of the process that usually takes the most time. So it's certainly not, oh my gosh, I have an idea, and then boom, it appears. There's a lot of stuff that has to happen in order for people to be able to leverage your innovation.
Great. So piggybacking off of that one, you touched on this a little bit, but Jordan, our last myth or fact statement we have here is innovation is a solo activity.
Yep, so it looks like the poll just flashed, and I think mine was the only one that every single person voted to say it was a myth. So as much as I would love to be contrarian, I agree it is a myth. Yeah, I think like similar to what Lisa was saying in the beginning about like being a creative genius, like there's a generalization I think that innovating is, you know, have it like only the visionaries at your company or like the idea people at your company are the ones that kind of innovate. But in my experience, it's typically much more like when I have an idea, the first thing that I do is socialize the idea. You know, I go to other people at my company that I admire. I go to peers. Maybe I go to people who could be potential stakeholders at the company because I want to get their input. And I was like reading something the other day that said innovation is really about having a natural curiosity, which I think everyone at my company that I think are, you know, that I would dub like an innovator, they're all just naturally curious people. And so I think if you are that type of person, then you are curious about what other people think about your idea. You start to pull other people in. You're really more inclusionary than you are exclusionary. So yeah, so I think we all agree, myth.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really great. And hopefully this grounds us all in what we're actually speaking about today. So when we talk about startup culture, we're not talking about the ping pong tables or the office kegs. We're talking about creating an environment that fosters curiosity and sharing ideas and really that integration and team building, which allows those ideas to come to life. So part one, let's dive in here and start peeling back the layers on how to create a startup environment inside of your organization. So we'll start with org readiness. Lucia, for folks that are eager to spearhead this sort of change inside of their org, where do you start?
Sure. Look, I think each organization starting point may look different, right? Depending upon their history with innovation activity, their maturity with capabilities, the talent mix, their goals and aspirations, all of those things. But as a grounding layer, first and foremost, I think it's really important to establish strategic intent and get very clear with your senior leadership team, which of course you need their buy-in and support. So proceed very much with caution if someone's telling you we should do some innovation efforts, but it's actually not socialized well at the top. There's no air cover, right? So first and foremost, I think the top of the house needs to be very much on board, be a supporter and be an advocate and be required to create the type of air cover that you need to do this work. But I think beyond that, making sure that you align on what is the strategic intent behind these innovation activities, right? Is it to create another differentiated product or solution quickly? Is it to be able to upskill and begin to transform the employee skill set within the organization? Is it to drive a broader transformation and culture change? Is it all of those things? And so I think depending upon what the response is and what you align on, then operating model, structures, tools, techniques, teams, funding, all of those things become kind of downstream planning impacts. So first and foremost, I would say it's really, really important to be very clear with your senior leadership team and sponsors around what is it that you're trying to achieve and what success looks like. Just as a starting point for the conversation. I'm curious to hear if other panelists have additional adds.
I think we talked about this a little bit, but one thing I just wanted to add with that is, in addition to making sure that this is sort of socialized at the top, I think understanding where your leadership sits in terms of their own initiatives outside of just innovation. So what else is going on in the business? Is this the right time for innovation? Do they have an appetite for it? Are there things that are potentially happening? We've obviously been in a pretty interesting year where a lot of people have had budget cuts and things like that. So it's a little bit beyond just having a great idea. Even if that great idea can prove valuable, the opportunity for investment might not be there. The appetite for change might not be there when people are just sort of like batting down the hatches. And so I think understanding all of the things on your leadership leadership's list, and where those are prioritized is really important in understanding whether or not your organization is ready for change like this.
We actually, to kind of piggyback off of that, we started building a lot of things and a lot of web applications, and we were just kind of going in a lot of different directions. And then one day I was thinking about it and I was like, why are we doing all this stuff? Like, what is the purpose? Is there like a broader plan here? And so I had a really interesting conversation with our CEO and asked him, like, what are your top 3 priorities? And I took those 3 priorities and I mapped them back to what we were working on. And I realized that if, we were working on like 5 things, like 3 of those didn't actually map back to the larger organization priorities for that quarter. So then kind of reevaluating, is that still important to us? Like, should I still keep on maintaining these, legacy products to still have value? And so having those very honest conversations at the very top, I think can be very important to redirect if you've kind of gone off track, especially during these times.
Yeah, maybe the other double click that I'll add to that, all of that sounds really great, is once you align on what it is that you're trying to achieve, right? What you want the innovation activity to do, I think then it's also really important to have some resourcing and timeline and team expectation alignment conversations, right? So wanting A, but having B to get there is not necessarily going to work. One of the things that I see most misaligned is the expectation that we want these lofty, amazing, breakthrough, disruptive innovations, but we want it now. We want it on an annual clip such that we're able to then measure it in the same way that we measure traditional ROI and PV and kind of get in sync with the same business planning cycle. So I think maybe to summarize, it's one part being clear on what it is that you want and why you want it, and then designing the right operating model to be able to get there, but aligning expectations with your leadership team on what it's going to take to get there. And some of that may require you to introduce a different definition of progress and value and what speediness looks like.
Thanks for rolling that up, Lucia. I love that. So it's not just the idea, it's also being really well informed about how that idea fits into your organization. What are our goals? What are our resourcing? To see if now's the right time and to see how we're going to execute that in real time. So, Jordan, say I have a genius idea. I believe it could totally alter the way we work, my team, our company, whatever it might be. How do I go about getting buy-in for that?
Sure. So one of the things that I was going to say is something that Lisa and Lucia and Ethan just kind of touched on about making sure that whatever your genius idea is that's going to transform your company is kind of aligned with the overall strategy of your company, which everybody kind of touched on. I don't want to be redundant, so maybe I'll just share some real world examples from my career. So at the Fool, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, our company was in a much different place than we are today, like a lot of companies over 6 or 7 years, both from a strategic perspective, also from a financial perspective. So 6 or 7 years ago, we still had debt to pay off. We had different strategic initiatives, and we launched basically a free product. It had the best intent. It was very altruistic sort of product. It was aimed at helping people generally invest better who didn't have any experience in investing or knowledge of investing, and it was free. Looking back in retrospect, it really wasn't the best time for our company to be launching a free product. And so ultimately it didn't really have the longest shelf life. And of course, I'm looking at that now with the benefit of hindsight, but I thought it was like a good example of just, if you look at that kind of in isolation, you have to make sure that whatever the strategy of your company is today, whatever you're thinking about kind of fits in. Does your company have capital to reinvest? Look for different things within your company. Do you guys have free cash flow? Are you seeing a lot of new jobs being posted? Are you seeing senior leadership pushing people for new ideas and changes? Those are great signs, and those are things to look for to tell you like, oh, cool, maybe there are things that I should be looking to do. the absence of those things also might be telling you something as well. And then the other thing I was going to say about kind of getting buy-in was, I've had a lot of people come to me over the years with new ideas, and they might be good ideas, but it's going to be a huge leap of faith in order to try and execute that idea. So trying to think more incrementally, I think, will help people get on board with your ideas. So is there a way, if you're at 0 and your idea is at 100, is there a way you can go to 20 to 40 to 60 and prove in some things in the interim? So, obviously if you can generate revenue, that's great, but it doesn't have to be revenue. It could be engagement with the free product. It could be traffic to a website or traffic to an order page, or whatever it is, but try and make it so that you can build some momentum, and you make it easier for your leadership team to give you the green light on something when you're like, hey, this is an iterative process. We don't have to jump from 0 all the way to 100. So that was kind of like the biggest thing I've taken from my time.
I want to piggyback on something you said, Jordan, and I think that really resonates with me and probably Ethan as well. I think a lot of times when we're looking at building new products, we look at the ideal state, like what would this thing be in the ideal world? And we have all of these thoughts and ideas, and it's this big thing, and it does all these cool things. And I think a lot of times we are encouraged, and rightfully so, to think about like, what is the minimum we can push out that would accomplish most of our goals? Like, is 80% good enough to accomplish a lot of those efficiencies or new revenue streams or whatever it might be, without necessarily needing, like, how much is that last 20% or 30% worth in terms of time and investment to get there, delaying speed to market, all of those sorts of things. Is that last bit really worth it to make it perfect versus something that could go out and then could be iterated on after that? Like, could that be a V2? I think that's probably our favorite statement, is like, can that be a V2 type thing? So what can you push out to accomplish maybe a majority or at least some portion of your goals to see positive return, again, in whatever form that is, revenue or otherwise? And then how can you iterate that over a number of years to show value, prove that this is worthwhile, and then sort of add on from there. So you don't have to tackle like the whole thing in the beginning right away. You can do it over a period of time. And in that way, you also get the opportunity to see results. So is it working at all? I think your example is a good one, Jordan. We've had, over my career, a ton of things that didn't work out. And if we had released a smaller version, would we have seen the writing on the wall before we had invested so much more time and energy into pushing the full thing out? It's just such a good lesson that I've learned personally.
And just to kind of combine Jordan's idea of, getting buy-in, and then also leases and making sure that you have those MVPs. What we found is that the creator of whatever the MVP is, like, will put in all the bells and whistles, and they're operating in a bubble, and they haven't necessarily gone to like 15 different clients and said, like, what do you think about this? And that's not necessarily their job. It's our job to take that idea and say, well, what is the kernel of this idea? Like, what are you really trying to accomplish? Because we love, like, we're technical folks, and we love just like keep on adding and adding and adding and adding without, and sometimes we can kind of lose sight of the overall goal that we're trying to accomplish. And so it's really a part of the innovation team to really distill that down. And then once we have that kernel, then look at all the bells and whistles and say, like, what do we actually need here? Start ripping stuff out, and then socializing it with clients to see, does this only work for clients in a certain industry? Does this only work with certain clients that are a certain size? And when you can start identifying who your target audience is for this product, then you can start figuring out, like, should we invest the time even in this MVP? And so, like, just having a lot of checkpoints along the way to say, should this idea continue on has been super critical, and we're still kind of working through today. But it will prevent you from, like, developing like the biggest, baddest ass thing possible, and then no one cares. That's happened way too many times. Some of the stuff that I've developed. So I definitely learned that lesson. It's iterative.
Yeah, I think super well said from the other panelists. This is probably one of the biggest stark differences that I oftentimes notice between startups and corporates, right, when they're working on products. And that is, look, startups are very resource constrained and their team is very lean. So they don't have the luxury of building these super large, kind of overly laden feature type products. But their orientation is very much towards learning and validation, versus large corporates tend to be more oriented towards delivery and scale, right? And the way that they're designing V1 of MVP is actually MMP, minimum marketable product already. So they're already jumping to what is the leanest, best, most delightful experience version of this if I envision it in market. And sometimes they lose sight of still the need to de-risk and think through, well, what is the biggest critical unknown? And how do we know with a high degree of confidence if this is actually going to work if we release it into the marketplace? So let's focus in on there. And to Ethan's point, strip out all the stuff that just is nice to have that may not actually help us prove that is the case. And so this is where kind of distinct opportunity, where I see the opportunity for startups to influence the behavior of corporates, which is continuously be thinking in terms of learning and validation versus release, completion, delivery, shipping, and certainly at scale. Until we prove that there could be product market fit, then why should we invest a lot of resources to scale?
That's great. So my genius idea is not going to be 0 to 100. It sounds like that's probably not the best path, but being a bit more iterative, really aligning that with business goals, a lot of what we touched on in org readiness around what's important, is the timing right, and how do I really hone in on the kernel, as Ethan mentioned, of my idea, and really leveraging that to prove value and then building it out as we kind of iterate and get buy-in over time. So obviously, change management is a big part of this. We get buy-in, people are on board, we're looking at kind of iterating, slowly rolling this out. What role does change management play in this conversation? And I'll bounce this one to you, Lisa.
This is my favorite one because really there is no innovation without change management. I mean, I would argue that it's almost the biggest piece. So great ideas are wonderful. Even getting buy-in is wonderful. But none of that really helps unless people, I think to Jordan and Ethan's point earlier, use the thing. And that's internally as well as externally. So you need, every time you're releasing something new, you need folks inside your organization to do something different than the way they did it before, most likely. And so change is not something that humans love, even when that change makes sense. And I think, proving value doesn't necessarily get people on board. This is something we've experienced. Even when you have support from the top of your leadership, it doesn't necessarily mean that all the folks that need to use this new thing or get on board with this new thing are as excited about it or want to make that change as you do. And so change management is really the key piece of succeeding, in my opinion, in innovation. And there is a lot to change management beyond just giving folks the product and maybe doing a training on how to use it or how to sell it or whatever the case might be. There's a lot of emotion to consider. There's the what does this do to my job considerations. There's just a ton of even folks in sort of adjacent parts of your organization. If this is a product that competes with theirs, if this is a product that replaces theirs, there's just a lot to consider about how folks are going to react within your organization. And if you can't get those folks on board, moving forward, selling correctly, using correctly, then your innovation is going to fall flat no matter how well thought out it might have been to begin with. So I'm curious everyone else's thoughts on this, but I think that's been the biggest learning, is that change management piece can often be an afterthought. You work up to this release, you get so excited, you get all the resources, you build this thing, there's all this testing, everybody's excited to launch. And then that post-deployment is always that change management within your org once this thing is ready, tends to sometimes be an afterthought when really that is the most critical piece. And the last thing I'll mention is measuring that change management. So how are you going to prove that this is working and this was worthwhile? I think that's something that we often leave until the last minute to think about, what are we going to measure and how are we going to see if people are adopting this and how are we going to encourage people and, what's that process look like? So Yeah, I'm curious to hear everybody else's experience with change management too, because that's always kind of the hardest part.
Yeah, coming from a lot of nightmare scenarios that I've experienced by not considering change management. So I'm so focused on the tech that I'll deliver it, and then it just kind of like goes out there, and I don't really know what happens to it, which is a terrible idea. You never want your tech guy just developing stuff kind of in a bubble, and we learned it the hard way because we released a product internally, and I worked with the CEO directly on it, and I worked with one of the team members, and that was it. There was 2 people, and we released it in December, the first version of it, and then we actually released it to the team like 2 months ago. It's because we never thought through the change management. Like, we never brought in directors. Because they have a whole series of concerns, like, what is the brain damage that we're going to have to do with our teams? What questions are they going to have? And so they're thinking through what does our budget look like? And they're thinking through a lot of things that I wouldn't have thought through. And so not bringing them in at the very beginning of the process then extended our release by like 6 to 8 months. We just kept on. We just got the craziest scope creep right at the end. It's like, oh yeah, we totally forgot to create handbooks. We totally forgot to do training. Oh my gosh, we forgot to do X, Y, and Z. And so had we had those early conversations, we probably could have released 6 to 8 months earlier than we actually did. So without considering change management, it just adds so much time to your release schedule. And then you just have a lot of people with a kind of bitter taste in their mouth when you actually do release it, because you didn't get their buy-in at the very beginning.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I would say, in my instance, reflecting on past experiences of standing up an innovation studio and, from strategy through to execution, I think that the best kept secret is I actually ran this as a change management project. Innovation happened to be the face, right? That was the topic soup du jour that we were trying to deliver, but very much so, from stakeholders to project planning to communications to socializing change to progress check, input feedback, to going on road shows and talking about what we were doing and providing updates. I think Lisa said it well. This thing is inextricably linked with successful innovation endeavors. So I would maybe say, and in the chat, someone did ask something around when might you introduce it and what would that look like? I'd say in the beginning, and it kind of never really goes away. So if you were to carve out different work streams to standing up innovation efforts, there's kind of the strategy component, right? So aligning goals, creating the right operating model, what are the various teams, structures, processes, policies, levers that you want to pull. There's the execution function, which of course is about solving the actual problems of the projects in the portfolio and delivering great results, the innovation itself. And then I would say there should be a change management, stakeholder engagement, and communications team or approach to it as well. And these 3 kind of interweave with each other. So as you're delivering on the work, you can gauge if your strategy was actually effective in the structures that you designed to help it be executed. And then, of course, you're going to need to engage with others to pressure test your thinking, pull them along, provide them deliberate opportunities to weigh in so they don't feel like you're going dark. Right? I think someone said it really well previously. No one likes to be surprised, and nobody really likes to have change sprung upon them. So as you put yourself in their shoes, especially with innovation activity, it tends to have in corporations this tinge of cool kids tinkering away in the dark, behind a cloak, wearing jeans and, special rules for these cool kids. And so I think making sure that the change management, the stakeholder engagement and comms piece is really well done and has a front and center seat throughout the entire endeavor helps to kind of destigmatize some of that and ease some of those concerns as well.
And I'll add again, like a real world maybe example from my own experience to what these guys have said. Since we're talking about building a startup culture kind of inside of an existing organization, one of the most important pieces and one of the most important stakeholders are, your fellow employees. And so a big part of, I think, change management is like, you might have awesome product market fit. You might be like, this is best product, market's there. But if the rest of the employees at your company don't want to launch that product, like, you are going to run into a massive wall. And we, there was a certain point in my company where we were looking at our demographic, and, naturally in product development, we're trying to find out what else can we do for them? What other problems can we solve for our audience? And one of the big topics that comes up besides finance is health. And so we started really looking into how can we help people with their health? We have an aging demographic, an aging audience. What else can we do? So we started kind of tinkering around with this idea. And I think that there are tons of different products that we could have launched that would have great product market fit. We had our, every month we have a company-wide meeting. We're incredibly transparent at the Motley Fool, and we tell people early and often what we're working on, and we let people give anonymous feedback. And we brought this up in one of our first monthly meetings, and people had like a visceral reaction. Like, you would have thought that we were trying to sell people cigarettes and, something terrible, but people were like, what are we doing getting into health? I mean, it was just really clear, like, that was not where our employee base's passion was. It was probably a little bit more of a controversial topic than I think we had even anticipated. Lots of different, opinions that tend to be really binary. So that was just like a good, lesson, I think, is that your employees are really important stakeholders when you're talking about developing that culture within an existing organization. So making sure you are tapping into them early and often is super important.
That's great. So when I ask what role change management plays in all of this, it sounds like it is it is this at the very same time. Like, they're not separate. They very much work together, and if you have one without the other, you are in trouble. So moving into part two, for folks that are on this call and they're kind of thinking about the current team that they're on, and might be wondering, like, hey, maybe my organization isn't quite there yet. Maybe in order to find this sort of startup culture or a space that really encourages innovation, that will have to be in a new company for me. I'd love to unpack some of the sights and sounds of, what do you look for as a job seeker? How do you know that the company you're stepping into is really embracing this sort of environment and culture, and it's going to be a place where you have the opportunity to share your ideas and help drive some of this change? So looking at this in 3 layers, I want to first focus on the team. So as Jordan mentioned, like, your colleagues are really important. From there, we'll move to managers. So we've all heard the phrase, people don't leave jobs, they leave managers. How does this come into play? And then also looking at the leadership team a bit as well. Certainly a ton of buy-in comes into play from the top down. So cracking this open a little bit, Ethan, what should job seekers be on the lookout for in potential colleagues?
When I look out at Seer and I look out at our competitors in the marketplace, one of the things that I look for is, what is the CEO saying? A lot of the direction of the company comes from them and their vision. And when I saw, actually, I found out about Seer like 10 years ago because of Will. He was on YouTube and he was just talking about, like, they were doing like link building or something like that. And he was talking about, I used to be an SEO, and he was talking about like calling up plumbers and like trying to get links from plumbers. And it was like the craziest, weirdest idea I think I'd ever heard. But it was like, it made a ton of sense. It was filled with empathy. He like really, really, really wanted to help out our customers. And that just brand new thinking, and it's just constant like spewing out of him is very inspirational, and it really helps guide the team. So, although I haven't worked in another company for like 10 years, when I look out at Seer and I say, like, what makes us, a really great place for innovation and change. I really look to the leadership, not only Will, but other directors that really want to, enact change and do something different. And when I see that, I'm like, I want to be a part of that. And that's why I've been here for so long, is there's always something new to do, in some way to get inspired. So if I were to be applying for a job today and I wanted to be in that innovative environment where you can grow and you can build your own role, I would definitely be looking to the leadership, not just the CEO, but what is the president saying? What are the vice presidents saying? And then what are they actually producing? So when I look at their blog or their social media, are they coming up with new ideas, or are they just retweeting everything that everyone else is saying? So that's kind of my perspective, having been in a company for a long time, and advice I'd have for job seekers.
Just to add on to that in terms of team too, I'm thinking like one of the things I think that drew me to Seer and that I've seen, looking hindsight, is that the flexibility within roles. So at the team member level, seeing people like Ethan and I didn't start at Seer in the roles that we have now. So that sort of mobility, internal mobility, when you have a good enough idea or you can prove value in a certain way, being given the formal opportunity to pursue that, I think is definitely, outside of obviously a formal innovation team being available, that sort of like internal mobility is something that I would look for. So, in interviewing, usually team members are the people that you're interviewing with most, if not managers as well. A lot of times I think one thing you don't get access to is senior leadership in the interview process. And so understanding where the folks you're interviewing with started, like have they seen mobility, that, and then the ability to expand outside of your roles, responsibilities, and like what the appetite for that is. I've worked in very large organizations where like there is no appetite to expand outside of your very structured role, right? Like that is your role and that's what you do. That type of an organization can be difficult for change or innovation because there's little appetite down sort of at the employee level to change or to innovate themselves. And so looking for folks organizations that create the ability for folks to do things beyond maybe their role that they might have an interest in. Seer's really big on that. Like you can have a role, but if you have an interest in something, you're welcome to pursue it. So that sort of like mobility within your organization, either physically within a job or formally within a job role, or just within your responsibility set, like getting the opportunity to participate in things that might be a little bit beyond what your actual role is usually a good indicator that your organization is interested in folks expanding their own ideas.
That's great. Thank you both.
Yeah.
That gives, oh, go ahead, Lucia.
Sorry, I was just gonna add one bump in there. If the question is for job seekers looking for certain qualities within the potential employers, especially within innovation, I might add maybe a couple more thoughts. So one is, I'd say, look for an organization that has both a mix of internally and externally hired folks, especially working in innovation functions, right? And the demonstration of an openness and willingness to learn from multiple perspectives, right? Diversity is the other kind of secret power weapon to having good innovative outcomes. And so, do people visibly look different, and do they have diversity of thought and background? So that's kind of one piece. Another thing is, I think the organization would do well if it recognizes and continues to nurture what I would call hybrid T-shaped people, or left brain, right brain thinkers, right? It doesn't start to force people down one specific path. You are known to be good at marketing, period. Somebody is a good developer, period, so on and so forth. But rather they recognize and appreciate when people are ambidextrous and can do multiple things, and will create additional opportunities for people to stand up those types of skill sets. And then the last thing I'd say is try to look for organizations, and this is something that you can probably observe and push on a bit in the interview process, that really rewards collaboration, but also with accountability, right? it's awesome to be right, and it's awesome to be fast and right. Like, we all know this, but especially for those of us working in innovation work, we're going to be wrong more often than we're going to be right. And so I want to see an environment that really celebrates that learning and will post up someone as a pillar of success that may be wrong, but learned a ton. And is willing to take accountability for kind of where things could have been different, right? As well as support the ongoing growth and development of others. So I think kind of this accountability and this collaboration with others piece is something that's really important.
I love that. Jordan, any idea of what that might look like at the manager level? As you're looking for a new company, what are some qualities that you want to seek out in your potential future manager?
Yeah, I was thinking about this a bit when you sent over the question, and you know, fortunately, I've had a lot of great managers that I've been able to kind of mimic some of their some of the ways that they kind of have treated me in the past. And I think that I love this question because it's really easy to be a good manager when someone comes to you with an awesome idea. Like, if someone comes with a incredible idea with a great product, and you're 100, like, any of us could be like, this is awesome, go, like, here's capital and here's resources. Like, that's not hard. The hard thing is when somebody comes to you with an idea on your team and you don't love it, or it's not the right time for it, it's not the right product, you don't, you know, for whatever reason, you don't believe in it. So, you know, for me as a manager, you've got to find ways to, you know, do the kind of not say no, but yes. And so you've got to find ways to tweak it. How can you kind of pivot? Can you edit it? Can you, you know, can you change it somehow? Because I think what you're really trying to do is create a positive atmosphere for innovation. And so I think the hardest thing that you can do, but I kind of like doing this, is saying yes to things that you actually don't believe in, which is hard, especially if you think like, oh my God, like, we're going to waste time and energy and focus and blah, blah, blah. But I guess in my opinion, sometimes the behavior is more important than the outcome. And you can teach your team these learned behaviors with how you act and how you treat them. You know, most things, like Lucia said, are going to fail. But if you want creative people to innovate, then you need to create, you know, you need to create an atmosphere for that. And so I think that's like a really important thing. I think if you're looking for that in a company or a team or a manager, like, ask them that, like, how do you handle things that fail? What if I come to you with a bad idea? You know, I think those are really important things to figure out as the person looking for this culture. I think it's really, really important for you as a good manager.
I love that. Jordan, the dream manager. And those are like great, great questions to bring to an interview. Cool. We're just running up on the Q&A. I definitely want to save the last 10 minutes here. For those of you joining us, please drop in questions. I just have one more thing I'd like to touch on before we roll into the Q&A. And Lucia, you mentioned this last time we connected, but you spoke to a concept of innovation theater. And I think that is, I think it was new for all of us and something that we all enjoyed, but I'd love to hear, like, what is that and how can job seekers keep their ears and eyes open for it?
Yeah, sure. It's not my original term by any means. I've heard it enough times that I thought it was a good way to describe. We've all seen this before, right? So it's kind of innovation activity for innovation's sake, for activity's sake. So there's a lot of busyness and a lot of things going on, but not necessarily tied to strategic goals or producing the type of results that you want. So it might look, gosh, so many different derivations of this. You know, labeling something truly breakthrough disruptive innovation, but it's actually quite incremental, right? Taking something that's currently in a manual, you know, analog form and then turning it digital. While it may be a better experience, but it's not really pushing into the new products, new segments, new markets, new business models category. Doing, unfortunately, because it can also be done quite well, a lot of hackathons, right? Or crowdsourcing ideas. So these things generate a lot of energy and interest and busy activity, but unless it's really tied with a well-structured portfolio and pipeline management process where you have a way to analyze the entries, kind of select the right ones, play back to the crowd what's going to happen with the ones that have been selected versus the ones who are not, and be able to maintain and keep track of these ideas and submissions and know how to activate the crowd to kind of work on them. Unfortunately, what I see a lot in the marketplace is, and this happens usually with companies who are at the earlier stages of their journey, they're so excited to get going, they kind of get caught up doing a lot of these busy activities or kind of vanity innovation or innovation theater. But without it really being tied to something tangible, and therefore the progress is not sticky and not lasting. So of course, then the negative impacts of that is innovation gets a really bad rep, or people just have one first impression, right? So they think this is what it's going to be. Oh, it's not all that hard. That's not all that novel. It's not all that different from what we've been doing, and it potentially loses energy, or in the worst instance, the team might be disbanded or the effort might be defunded. So I think this maybe comes full circle back to the original conversation that we just first had around making sure you're very clear on what you want the innovation outcome to do for the organization, right? And designing the right processes, supporting structures, and mechanisms to get there. I think that's at least how I mean when I think about innovation theater and kind of vanity metrics that are oftentimes associated with busyness versus desired outcomes and progress.
Awesome. Well, I want to flip us over to Q&A. Again, if you have any questions, please drop them in. The first one we have here, it's a longer one, so maybe we can chunk it out. How to find inspiration for an idea as a tech entrepreneur? What's the correct approach? Finding an untapped market loophole in the market, or solving your own problems, providing value to yourself by inventing a product or service that's applicable to the masses? So it sounds like, where does one find inspiration, and should the approach be that we're working within an untapped market, or really kind of looking at our own problems and solving for those?
I'll offer just, I guess, one perspective, because I think there's a lot of different ways to answer this one, but I think it depends on the type of entrepreneur that you are. So I feel like I've listened to so many podcasts, read so many articles about successful entrepreneurs who started making shoes and gadgets, and now they ended up being in charge of a coffee conglomerate, and you're like, wow, that is a crazy arc of, and I think when you look at those sort of people, they're just so passionate about entrepreneurship that it really doesn't matter what kind of widget they're creating, because they'll be passionate about it. Personally, for me, I'm not that type of person. I need to be passionate about the widget that I'm creating, or else I'm just not going to be good at it. And also, we spend so much time in our lives working that for me, I'm like, if I'm going to be spending, X amount of hours a day, a week, a month on something, I want it to be something that, I'm interested in, that maybe I have some interesting insights in that I would also want to use. So for me, I wouldn't look to just any untapped loophole or however it was that the question was presented, because I want to be passionate. So I would look at my list of things that I'm excited about and that I'm passionate about, and then I would try to find something in there. But again, I think it's other people are just serial entrepreneurs who could create anything and be excited about. So I really just think you kind of need to be self-aware about what kind of gets you going.
Yeah, I'll maybe chime in as well. So I totally agree. Building and launching a product or a business requires everything out of you and then some. And so it's difficult to envision someone being very fulfilled doing something that they are personally not very passionate about for a very long time, right? But maybe to clarify, I think the inspiration for the problem or the idea doesn't have to originate from yourself, right? So, in venture capital, we oftentimes talk about you know, you first and foremost, before you wow me with the technology or the solution, have you found the right problem to solve in the marketplace, right? Is it large enough, meaty enough, potentially impactful enough to enough people? And so I think finding the right opportunity is first and foremost really important. And you can certainly reflect on your own experiences, your networks, or just be really observant to the opportunities, gaps, and unmet needs in the world. So that's kind of one thing. The second thing that I'll say is, of course, there's tools of the trade. So we know human-centered design, lean startup, agile practices, like these are very tried and true methods to help take an entrepreneur through the process of building and validating a product in a business. But then finally, maybe the thing that I'll share is, I've certainly fallen into this trap myself in the past as well. If it is a problem that's very personal and dear to you, which is great, you can bring a lot of realness to it, but please be on guard for designing for yourself versus designing for the marketplace, right? I love it, my friends love it, therefore it's gonna work. Now, if you and your friends are very representative of the masses that you're trying to get after, fantastic, but chances are people are very dynamic and unique. There's going to be a lot of differences between yourself and potentially your target market or your scale market. So yeah, I agree with Jordan that, you know, definitely try to find something that you're passionate about, but maybe it's at the intersection of making sure it's also a market problem that matters enough to other people, and then designing for your target market versus just yourself.
Great. All right, we have one last question and 3 minutes left. So we'll try to make this one quick, but innovation and failure are often tied together. How have you seen failure handled well? What are best practices for owning your failure, and what would you avoid?
I want to jump in on one of the sort of the last question, which was what would you avoid? I think not calling something a failure or trying to sell it as anything but a failure when it truly was is doing yourself and your organization a disservice. So the first and foremost, recognizing that something was a failure and that failure was okay, because you know that those failures help you learn. I think everybody on this call is a testament to we've all had failures, and we've taken a great deal away from those things to make our future products hopefully successes, although we'll still have failures in the future. But just recognizing that it was a failure, being open about that. I think one of the other things that sometimes you miss is you chalk something up as a failure and you move on, but there are so many learnings from that, no matter what it was. And so something, you know, we do retrospectives at Seer after projects, whether they were successes or failures or sort of somewhere in between, right? So what did go right? What didn't go right? How can we improve the process for the next time around? And a lot of times those things are not necessarily, it's not even necessarily the product or the service that failed. It might be all of the change management pieces around it, or what we went through, or, you know, Ethan spoke about how we designed things or who we brought in, who we didn't bring in. So those retrospectives can be very, very helpful. I would say go into those with structure. So what is like a structured conversation versus like a whole bunch of people just throwing out ideas and maybe not getting what you need out of that conversation. But that is a really clear value that I've seen at Seer that I haven't seen at other organizations. Things just sort of fail and we like, you know, nobody wants to talk about it and we move on. I think Seer is so different in recognizing that failure and almost celebrating that, publicizing it, letting people know that we're not moving forward for whatever reason, and then doing a full retrospective on what we can learn to apply sort of the next time around.
Yeah, and I'll also offer up very quickly, be very clear and disciplined about what you're trying to test in each cycle and what is the sufficient threshold, right, or hurdle rate. I can remember a couple of years back, we were working on a fintech concept that the team loved. We were super in love with it. We thought it was going to be amazing. Get ready, world. We're going to come to disrupt you. And thank goodness we put in place kind of the metrics that we aligned on with our venture board in advance on what we were going to measure over what period of time and what would denote, you know, a green light to keep moving forward. And it didn't prove out. It just didn't. And we didn't want to give up. So we did another test, a different set of metrics. That also didn't prove out. We went through one more pivot, that didn't quite prove out strongly enough. So I think, it's making sure that you're also disciplined about data-driven decision making and setting those up in advance. Because afterwards, I think, if you enter into a test without setting any of those parameters, you can make the data tell whatever story you want it to. So that is also another good way to kind of be disciplined about it.
Awesome. Well, we are just at about time here. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for the questions from those who joined the conversation as well. If you have any further questions for the speakers following this discussion, feel free to follow up on LinkedIn. Everyone here has speaker profiles on the Philly Tech Week site. Otherwise, hope you all have a great Philly Tech Week ahead of you. Thanks for joining in on this discussion, and have a great day.
Thanks so much. This is great.